Good afternoon, I'm Ed Drench alongside Katie Morris. We interrupt your regularly scheduled program to bring you some breaking news this afternoon. 7 Eyewitness News has learned through law enforcement sources that escaped inmate David Sweat has been captured alive by New York State Police. We're told he has been shot and is bleeding badly, but he has been taken into custody by New York State Police within the last half hour in the town of Constable, which is right near Malone in the north part of New York State.
That's right, only about 6 miles north of Malone and very close to the border of Canada. Again, David Sweat taken into custody. He is alive. Law enforcement sources tell us that. This coming only 2 days after Richard Matt was also shot and killed in a nearby area.
Yeah, this comes after 3 weeks of intense searching for both of these escaped inmates. It was on June 6th that both Richard Matt and David Sweat broke out of the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. Both of these escaped inmates waged very courageous plan to get out of that correctional facility. Both of them locked up for 25 years to life. Richard Matt for killing his boss back in 1997. And now David Sweat, who has been locked up for some time for killing a sheriff's deputy in Broome County, now taken back into custody after escaping earlier this month.
Now, the search intensified for David Sweat over the past couple of days after law enforcement sources told us that they shot and killed Richard Matt, and his autopsy results came out today. We learned he was shot 3 times in the head by police once they saw him, and they did do that autopsy. Those results released today, but they had basically honed in on that area, and they've been looking in that very similar area for David Sweat. This all coming too after people who had camping grounds in the area saw their camps had been broken into.
And you can see on this map here how close it is to the Canadian border. This is just miles away, and as we heard from New York State Police over the last couple of days, there was an inclination, some sort of a thought or idea that these two men, David Sweat and Richard Matt, would be heading toward the Canadian border. Of course, we now know Richard Matt was shot and killed on Friday, and now David Sweat, once again, as we repeat our breaking news tonight, this afternoon rather, has been taken into custody. Of course, this also comes about a week after the search intensified here in western New York, down in Allegheny County, when a tipster called New York State Police just last Saturday, telling police that they saw someone who fit the description of at least one of these escaped inmates. Obviously, that tip led them nowhere down here, but it was the tip that was called in last Saturday morning by a tipster, somebody in a campground in upstate New York, the north part of the state, the North Country, who said that they heard shots fired, which is ultimately what led police and the FBI and all of the law enforcement agencies to this one part of the state right near Malone, New York. It was Owl's Head, New York, that originally where this focus intensified last week about this time, but again at this point, 1 dead, 1 captured and alive.
And really this search in northern New York, again, as we said, has really intensified over the past few days because their initial plan was not to stay in northern New York. It was to go with prison employee Joyce Mitchell, who had at one point agreed to drive them 7 hours away, but that was their initial plan. Again, as we know and we've learned over the past few weeks, she did not show up. We want to go to an ABC News special report. We have live team coverage continuing right now.
40 miles from the prison. Authorities found Sweat's DNA about a mile from where Matt was shot. He remained on the run for about 2 days, but police and federal agents predicted they would have him within 48 hours, and they were correct. I want to go straight to ABC's Lindsay Janis, who joins us live from Malone. She's been covering the story since it broke. Now, Lindsay, what can you tell us about the manhunt to find Sweat and what people are saying now who have been terrorized by these 2 escaped prisoners?
Hello, Tom. 1,300 officers. That's how many officers swarmed to this area. They had a pretty good idea that Sweat was somewhere near Matt because, again, they found that DNA linked to Sweat within 1 mile of where officers shot and killed Matt. Now, that DNA, together with another report they were following up on, a man in dark clothing found in the woods sometime yesterday or last night. There has been a frenzy of activity here, dogs on the search. The rain has been hindering some of those search efforts, but clearly they got their man.
That's true. Both these men on the run for about 20, well, at least David Sweat on the run for at least 23 days. His partner on the run for more than 20. Lindsay, what are people there saying? Are they breathing a sigh of relief now because so many people who lived in these surrounding towns around the woods were so scared?
Yeah, people here have been desperate for the capture of these two men. They were encouraged by the killing of Matt. They have been desperate for this moment. People here have been on lockdown. They've had daily calls from police officers asking them to stay inside their homes, to be extra vigilant. People have been checking their hunting cabins on a daily basis, looking for signs. And the locals have been a big reason why these two men have been caught.
Okay, Lindsay Janice reporting for us from Malone, New York. Again, we want to recap the breaking news. David Sweat, you've seen there, captured. He was shot, but he has been captured, the escaped prisoner. We're going to have much more on this story coming up on World News Tonight and anytime at abcnews.com. We thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Yamas in New York. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, that was an ABC News special report. I'm learning through some law enforcement sources that David Sweat, has been shot. He is bleeding and in custody in the town of Constable right now. He is severely bleeding right now. There's no word on his condition, though. Of course, this comes days after his accomplice, Richard Matt, was shot and killed in the town of Malone by law enforcement, who found him ultimately 21 days after he was on the run and escaped from prison.
And 23 days now for David Sweat, who again just was brought into custody only moments ago. And we did reach out to the AMVETS up in Malone. That is where a lot of law enforcement officers have been gathering throughout the search. They've been up there for the past few days as that search intensified, as they were narrowing in on where David Sweat was. We reached out there. We spoke to an employee there who said phone calls started coming in and there were cheers all around the rooms.
Yeah, you can imagine this is a very proud moment for New York State Police, the FBI, and again, the multiple law enforcement agencies, 1,300 officers, as you just heard, who are there, who have been searching intently and intensely for these two escaped inmates 3 weeks after they escaped from the Clinton Correctional Facility. Their safety ultimately was at risk. It was David Sweat, of course, who killed a Broome County Sheriff's deputy back in July of 2002. He had been in jail since October of 2003 and ultimately serving some life sentence there and waged this elaborate plot to break out of prison. On Friday, though, when we told you that Richard Matt was shot and killed, I was the one to tell you that these two inmates were in fact traveling together when we were on the air at 6 o'clock on Friday evening. That's coming from my law enforcement sources, and at that point we had learned that there was a strong dog track for David Sweat, and ultimately that they were trying to push him out from the woods to a road. We know that there was no gunshot fired between Richard Matt and David Sweat. It's unclear, Richard Matt rather, and law enforcement. It's unclear though how the battle went down between David Sweat and the law enforcement officers who picked him up today.
And we know that, yes, it's been 23 days, but those have been a long 23 days. The wilderness up there, very thick, very difficult, and we did get the autopsy results from Richard Matt's autopsy today. Not only did we learn that he had been shot in the head multiple times by police, but we also saw that he was feeling the signs of being out in the woods for that long. Bug bites and different abrasions from running through those woods, which again, very dense, very thick up in that area.
Yeah, police found DNA evidence from some clothing and from other matters and materials that were in this cabin near Owl's Head, New York, a couple of days ago that ultimately confirmed that one of the inmates, now we've learned is Richard Matt, was in fact there. This again comes sometime, days, weeks after they escaped from the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, thanks in part to police say Joyce Mitchell and Gene Palmer, these two prison workers who were arrested and ultimately charged in connection to the escape of these two inmates. This again was an intense manhunt for these two men that spanned the country for all intents and purposes, but really focused on some parts around Western New York. It was just Friendship, New York last week where these two inmates were reportedly cited by a tipster. That tip came in as credible but unconfirmed, but of course it was just a couple of days ago that a confirmed sighting came into police, and that's ultimately what led police and law enforcement and 1,300 officers to these two men.
And all this information about David Sweat only coming out within the last half hour or so, and we were following on social media some of the people who live up in northern New York. I saw an Instagram video of someone who was putting up pictures of state troopers flying by their house, all headed in that Coventry area, or I'm sorry, Constable area, and now that's where we've learned that David Sweat was taken into custody.
So just to recap, within the last half hour, 7 Eyewitness News has learned through law enforcement sources that escaped inmate David Sweat has in fact been captured and is alive. He is shot, badly bleeding, but we know he has been taken into custody. We will continue to follow breaking news for you throughout the day on WKBW.com, and of course coming up tonight on 7 Eyewitness News at 6. For now, I'm Edge Ranch alongside Katie Morris. We'll return you to your regularly scheduled programming.